A really important conversation I have with a lot of athletes is discussing why it's not a great idea just to do base Ks only or long, slow, continuous training only and absolutely nothing else when it comes to your endurance preparation. So in this video, we're going to break down exactly why that's the case. I've mentioned it in parts in other videos on this channel before. We're going to take you into the physiology of why you're missing out a little bit and why doing a bit of high intensity interval training and adding in some high intensity as part of your base aerobic process is actually a much more effective, better bang for buck way about going about those general adaptations, whether you're just generally trying to get as fit as you can, you're starting a preparation, you're working through a base aerobic phase towards a bigger goal, how adding in a little bit of that is actually a little bit more effective, and why just doing base Ks alone is probably wasting your time a little bit. So without any further ado, let's get into it. Hey, welcome back to the channel. Nick here, making sports science simple. And in today's video, we're talking why base Ks by itself, if you're only doing long, slow, continuous training, you're probably doing it wrong. And really, this stems from a number of conversations I have with athletes all the time who just, one, don't know that doing a bit of high intensity is going to be beneficial to them. And they go in with this mindset. It's a completely understandable mindset. And I see where they're coming from of, I'm just trying to build some Ks and legs, or I'm just trying to get generally fitter. I don't need to peak for an event. My event's not for another 9 months or maybe even 12 months. I just want to stay fit, or I just want to get as fit as I can now, so that when I get to that part where I'm getting a bit more specific, well, that's when I can gain that real race fitness, or I can build the speed in. To some extent, maybe a couple of weeks of this is okay. If you're just getting back into training from a long time off, maybe you've finished a rehab program from an injury, you've taken a lot of time out of training completely, and you're just getting back into it, maybe just doing some long, slow stuff just to get you in the routine of training for a few weeks is probably okay. Doing that continuously over a large period of time, so what I'm talking about here is dedicating your entire general preparation phase. So if we're looking at a 6-month Ironman build or a 6-month 70.3 triathlon, a marathon build, whatever you like, if you're just doing the first couple of months of, I'm just doing long and slow and I'll worry about anything faster than really our top end of our zone 2 or faster than our VT1, LT1, I've mentioned those points in terms of training zones and those ventilatory or lactate thresholds, where things start to tip over into more that tempo, you only start bringing really those higher intensities in later in the program, you're probably missing out. And all of this, I guess, funnels down from primarily what are the adaptations we're trying to achieve, and what is the physiological, I guess, workings or pathways, processes that underpin those adaptations, and how can we maximize them? So absolutely correct that the long, slow, continuous training is a completely important part of endurance preparation. At the end of the day, endurance events are start line, finish line. You have to get from A to B fundamentally, or you have to complete the most amount of distance in a given period of time, whether that be a 12-hour or 24-hour event, etc. So there is a component where you need to build really good quality muscular endurance. You need to have some great aerobic capacity to be able to go and go and go. And sure, doing the long, slow, continuous stuff is really good at developing that. We know that by building the Ks in the legs, we're going to get a greater ability to sustain a particular pace for a longer period of time. So I guess the key thing that I want to touch on first is really the mindset of when people also say, oh, I need to only run slow because that's going to help me run fast. I personally have a bit of a disagreement with that, and to me it makes no sense, because yes, if we look at something like a half marathon, if you set out at 4:30 pace, for example, and all you do is just run long, slow, and that's your 4:30 pace is part of your long, slow, you work on that, it might help you to run that pace for a little bit longer. So instead of fading at the 15k mark of a half marathon, you might only fade at the 18 mark, or you might fade, or you might not fade, you might be able to sustain it through the end. So technically in that event, you have been able to go faster because you've just sustained pace for a longer period of time. My gripe with that philosophy is that, well, why wouldn't we target our physiology in a way and target our training in a way to allow us to start out at 4-minute K pace and sustain that, even if we could sustain that to, say, the 16k mark of the half marathon, and then you fade it out to 4:30s, that's going to be significantly quicker because we've gained 30 seconds per K for the first 16Ks. That's a massive chunk of time. We're talking minutes and minutes and minutes of improvement in that first portion by doing something differently. And you're only going to get that by having some of the high intensity in there first. So I just want to bring that to the front, that whole you need to train slow to go fast. Yes, if you're looking at just sustaining the same low intensity for a longer period of time than you can currently, or if it's in combination with some high intensity training to allow you to develop that ability to run fast or cycle fast or swim fast as well. So that's the first little component to this. Now let's get into a bit more of the in-depth physiology. And I do apologize for throwing in some jargon here, but I'm going to keep it really, really simple as best I can. It fundamentally comes down to this very great summary from the research paper, looking at what are our what we call signaling pathways. What are the activations? What are the processes within our physiology that are, I guess, activated by these different types of training? And I'm going to start with the high volume stuff first. So by going and doing, and by high volume, that's when we're talking about our long, slow, continuous, repeated contractions again and again and again over a long period of time. And typically this is where our major volume is. This is where we're going to go out and do that 1.5-hour run or that 3-hour, 4-hour bike ride, the multiple 3-4K type swim sets of continuous activity. That's what we're talking about here. And what this I guess training induces, it induces an activation of what we call the calcium calmodulin kinase. Very, very fancy term for basically saying calcium signaling pathway. And all that activates is what we call the master switch, which is, again, if we're looking at the fancy terms of it, and I've got it written on here because even I get confused stumbling my words over this, but we're talking about PGC 1A effectively. It's a very convoluted way of saying this is our key, really, on and off switch, if you like, in terms of activating some of our really positive aerobic adaptations. And what I mean by those aerobic adaptations, and I might put it up on the screen so you can see the chart here, are things like an increase in the use of our type 1 muscle fibers. So there are slow twitch, our endurance, really positive aerobically based muscle fibers, allowing us to create those contractions again and again. Lowly fatiguing, but can be durable and last long and long and long. Increasing things like mitochondrial biogenesis, fancy term of saying more mitochondria, bigger mitochondria, and greater surface area of the mitochondria to get oxygen into the muscle cell, use it in the mitochondria to break down things like carbohydrates and fats to be able to create the fuel and the energy that we need. Things like increased oxidative capacity, which is just fats. What does that mean? I can break down more fats, so it means I can delay the onset of burning through my carbohydrates too much and hitting the wall, and obviously increase in available glycogen to allow me to use those carbs, which is ultimately going to help me run a bit faster or ride a bit faster as well. More freely available energy, and it's going to break down a little bit quicker. So all of these really positive adaptations, and there's more to the adaptation than this. These are really our big key rocks that are going to do those big fundamental changes. A lot of that's happening at the muscle, happening at the actual, where am I using the oxygen site. Sure, we get to some changes like increased left ventricle size, so we can pump more blood out of the heart. We've talked about stroke volume before on the channel and that importance. Obviously, some of these come into the fore, but we're going to mainly focus on these adaptations here because these are our really big key back-end ones of the process. Sure, all of this comes from doing our long, slow, continuous, and higher volume type training. But if we flick over the other side of this as well, this exact same PGC1A master switch, this golden ticket into all the goodness really of those aerobic adaptations, happens from the high intensity interval training as well. And that's where we're not looking at repeated contractions necessarily for a long period of time. We're now looking at these really high energy and high intensity contractions, really forceful. We're now lifting the pace up. You have to run fast here. And all of this type of stuff in this area is really above our lactate threshold, or above our anaerobic threshold. We're heading towards VO2 max to elicit this stimulus. Doing things like sub-threshold tempo isn't hard enough. We got to push the body to its upper limits. We're talking aerobic power. How quickly can we use that oxygen, or increase the rate of oxygen consumption? And by going through this pathway, again, apologies for a little bit of jargon here, but we're going through the signaling pathway of what we call adenosine monophosphate kinase, or AMPK. Basically, it's just because we're now looking at high energy contractions versus high number of repetitions. Of course, there's going to be a different process to where these adaptations come from, where the signaling comes from, and what within our physiology triggers that switch on of flipping that light switch. It's almost like having light switches in the room, one on either side of the room. Well, you could hit either and we're going to get the same output. The light's going to turn on. It's just, am I choosing this one over here or that one over there? They're just two different pathways to the same endpoint. And what we can see is that these come together through that PGC1A, that good master switch, that golden ticket into our adaptations, to lead to the exact same outputs. So from this perspective, it's a case of, well, what then results is we're targeting from two different avenues the same adaptations, which in theory there's potentially a greater ability to develop more of a stimulus. A blend of these signals is what we call it in terms of a mix of high intensity interval training, those high energy contractions and the long, slow, continuous, bigger volume type training, a mix of that is probably the most appropriate way to get maximum bang for buck in terms of stimulus and a more, I guess, frequent flicking on of that PGC1A to open up those adaptations. So I guess that's the bonus of adding in that high intensity. And this is really why I encourage a lot of athletes in this base phase to include some of that high intensity training in with their base aerobic stuff. So a base aerobic phase, if you like, if we're building general aerobic qualities and adaptations, should be a combination of your long, slow, continuous training and some high intensity interval training right up near VO2 max to elicit maximum bang for buck and really continue to target those adaptations in across all of our sessions, really. So we're not just hitting it from one end of the spectrum, we're getting good transition. And ultimately, this is where, from the high intensity aspect, that's going to lead into some other important adaptations that aren't listed here that we may not be necessarily getting from the long, slow. And where I'm going here is things like improvements to our running economy. Running at high speed is going to naturally teach you to practice running fast, so we'll get a bit quicker and a little bit more effective in terms of our movement, of course. But also it's going to put you under higher stress through the knees, Achilles, or joints, muscles, tendons. All of these things are going to get stronger and more resilient to that higher intensity. Because ultimately, when we are running faster, we're riding at higher intensities, etc., there's more strain and stress on the body and the muscles and all of those components that if we provide some of that stimulus and gradually build that over time, we get more resilient to it, so we can tolerate more of it. That ultimately means that we're going to be a bit more resilient to things like injury and we're not going to break down as easy when our training gets harder, when we start to ramp up or we bring more speed later into the program. So that's why you set a really good foundation early. So ultimately, all of these factors combined are going to lead to us being quicker. And that's where I come back to my point at the start of, do we just want to get better at the same pace we are now and just be able to do that for longer? Or do we want to try and also be able to do that, sure, but also lift up our capacity to be able to run faster in the first place? If you can spend more time running faster, well, that's our ultimate goal of endurance performance, isn't it? We want to be able to go faster for a longer period of time. Not necessarily, sometimes it's okay just to go longer for the same pace or same speed, same output. That might help us in some circumstances, but if we can go faster and go longer, that's our ideal scenario. So hopefully you get a little bit out of that. I do, again, apologize for some of those little bits and pieces in terms of that complex terminology. I wanted to throw some of that in there so you understand that some of these processes are very, very complex, but that's the whole point of this channel here, is to break them down, keep them as simple, take some of that jargon and just bring it back down to a base level so that anyone can understand it. Whether you're watching this as an athlete yourself, if you're a coach, if you're getting into sports science, if you have a bit of an idea, regardless of who's watching this, you can get a bit of a grasp of what we're talking about from a physiological perspective and bring some of these complex topics and processes back down to a level that we can all engage in, we can all get some benefit from understanding, because these are really are some key building blocks, if you like, or foundations of why a lot of the stuff I talk about on here and a lot of the training you might hear about and what pros are doing and people who are successful in the endurance industry are doing. These are really the building blocks to the why behind all of that. So hopefully you got a little bit out of today. Let me know, as always, any questions around that mix, if you like. I'm going to do a couple of follow-ups to this, talking about training intensity distribution and how much high intensity versus low we should do, cover things like 80-20 in a bit more detail, and also a couple of metrics for monitoring that training load in some future videos. So keep an eye out for that. But otherwise, any questions, please let me know down below. Let me know what you do. Always happy to hear it. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it there for today. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.